Director of Outreach and Business Development for the dorm. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to John McGeehan, our CEO.
Hi guys, thank you all for joining us today. I wanted to welcome you to a new academic landscape, helping students prepare. I think this is a very important conversation that I think we've all been having over the past few weeks as students start making decisions about what their fall is going to look like. We're super excited to have Justin Jacques from Penn State School of Medicine with us, and Laura Place from the University of Maryland. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently today, with the announcement coming out from the NAACP to observe silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of George Floyd's life. We will be stopping our presentation and Q&A at 3:45, and we invite you all to hold space with us for this pivotal moment in our history. As an organization, we're very much feeling like we're at an inflection point and feel a tremendous civil duty to bring about permanent and long overdue change. So we are welcoming and hope that you stick with us for those 8 minutes following 3:45. With that, I'm just going to quickly introduce the dorm team. We have Amanda Falk, my partner and our Chief of Clinical. She'll be handling the Q&A, as well as Sarah Hart, our director down in DC. Because we're going to be ending for this moment of silence at 3:45, we're going to invite you all to please put questions in your chat box. If we're not able to get to them, we're going to go ahead and personally outreach you guys to make sure all of your questions get answered. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Hart to get started.
Thanks, John, and thank you everyone for joining us. A special thank you to Laura and Justin, who will be joining me in this presentation. I just have to say that it's been my pleasure over the years to work directly with both Laura and Justin at the University with Laura at the University of Maryland in College Park and the Health Center. And Justin and I were colleagues at George Washington University. He is now at Penn State's College of Medicine. So I'm just so grateful for your time and the voices that you can add to our conversation today about how we can help students adjust to this new academic landscape. I'm also really grateful for the support of John and all the folks at the dorm and this community to be able to create some space to just acknowledge and support folks who are fighting for racial justice and for the end of violence and murders of unarmed people, mostly Black men, but other people as well, and all the violence and oppression that goes along with that. So, you know, it's really important to me personally, but I think also as an organization, we wanted to value the time that it would take to honor George Floyd in particular, but also think about and honor all the memories of other folks as well. So thank you for your patience with that choice that we're making. And also we encourage you to stay on Zoom with us for those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or observe in whatever way you feel you are able to do. That said, let's spend some time talking about what are we doing to help our young people with this academic landscape these days? You know, I heard on the radio actually this morning that there are a handful of college presidents testifying on Capitol Hill today to talk to Congress about what they can do as universities and how Congress might be able to support them in making the decision about what's going to happen in the fall. And so this is not only a question that we're talking about today, it's a question that 14 million college students across the country are asking themselves and their families. It's what universities are spending a lot of bandwidth trying to plan for. And as a treatment provider and as mental health professionals, we felt it was really important to think about what is our role in helping young people and their families navigate this landscape that we find ourselves in. You know, one of the things that's really important is to really acknowledge that universities provide more than just academics. So this is, hopefully we're approaching from a holistic perspective and recognizing that classroom is one very big question that we're asking, but also what else about the university? So we'll spend some time talking about that. You know, as the pandemic has been going on for the last couple of months, of course, we know that university students, young adults, are feeling unsettled and anxious. This is a spring semester that is filled with loss, and that loss can be of the experience of being on college campuses, the loss of graduations, prom for high school students, other kinds of events that are often taking place this time of year. It's also a literal loss for a lot of people who have had family members die, or other kinds of losses that they've had in their families. And so this is a period of grief that so many students are going through. And as we know, this high emotional toll is making it even harder to have the bandwidth to really think through what are the choices that students need to make for this summer and the fall. As I was saying, the universities are more than just a classroom. Of course, academics are the purpose that universities exist and so important, and the landscape of learning and personal development is so important for so many university students and the faculty and staff who work on campus. But remember that students use universities for resources for many areas of their life and personal development. There are health center services, there are counseling services, students rely on disability accommodations, there are really thriving in lots of campus collegiate recovery programs to support students in recovery. A lot of universities are building programs to support students with autism or other differences in learning to be able to thrive and truly diversify what a university experience can be like for people. Food and housing are also a huge piece of university experience that many students really rely on. So when we're thinking about how this changing landscape is evolving over the summer and into the fall, I want us to really make sure that we're opening the umbrella to include all of those things, and including multicultural service centers, LGBT groups and supports, religious communities and services, and lots of spaces that, in particular, marginalized communities can find some like-minded folks, connect with each other and their allies, which often aren't available in smaller communities or in different parts of the country. So that's one of the best things when people say that university years are some of the best years of your life. Often they're talking about that access to those communities and being able to connect with folks. We also know that most university students went home, whatever home means for them, when the pandemic came up. So a lot of students are leaving residence halls, leaving campuses, and returning home. Unfortunately, at times to unsafe or unwelcome families or to family dynamics that are difficult. Sometimes family dynamics because they're difficult about different identities, in particular LGBTQ+ communities, but also young people who are really worried about their families, worried about family resources, illnesses, obviously contracting coronavirus, but also other illnesses and other kinds of challenges, and job insecurity. And what we've seen with the dorm clients in some ways, but I think we've seen nationally too, is that when young people go home, there's some regression in their roles, whether that be roles in their family or roles to an earlier kind of developmental phase where they start acting more adolescent and less young adult, or more reliant on their family or provider or adults in their life to provide certain services like laundry or cooking or cleaning. And what we're doing is saying, let's be careful with that. Let's not slide back.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Remember me?
Hi there. Actually, Dolores, I'm going to wait. I'm going to ask you to hold your comment until just the end.
I'd be glad to. I just didn't know if I was tuned in.
Yep, we got you, Doris. Nice to see you. So, and if you have a question, just a reminder to put it in the chat and we'll talk about it at the end. So, you know, this brings us to a point in time, you know, thinking about the first week of June. I know I've had family members who are making their decisions about where they're committing to different universities that were delayed from May to June 1st. And so this is a big week. June may also be the month when a lot of schools try and figure out what the heck they're going to do in the fall. But this is a time when university students and universities are trying to figure out, what are we doing? We have timelines that we need to adhere to without a lot of information, because of course, frankly, we just don't have a lot of information. University administrations and faculty and staff members are really closely partnering with public health officials, both nationally, but also public health experts in their universities. And staff are working constantly to try and figure out what are the plans for housing, infrastructure, balancing this really complex institution of a university and trying to figure out what's safe. And while we've learned a tremendous amount about the coronavirus over the last couple of months, what we know is that we've learned a tremendous amount, but there's still a lot unknown. And the turnaround times for decisions for both universities and families is short. You know, the summer months are moving quickly, and people need to think about where they're going to be able to make plans. But universities also know that there's a whole lifetime between June and August when it comes to information about this pandemic. And one of the things that I want to say that's really important is universities will come out with plans. They will tell their students who are either incoming students or returning students what their options are. Maybe there will be more than one option, which is really helpful. But remember that not all plans fit all students. So one of the things I just want to say today, we're going to be talking about having some things to think through and some tips to navigate this time. One of the things that's really important to me is saying that not all plans fit all students. So I really encourage those of you who work with young adults or have young adults in your families to think about, does this plan, when we learn of it, actually work for my young adult child or the young adults that I'm working with and for? So just to touch on quickly what we've done at the dorm to try and fill the gap or meet the needs of many of these young people is that we have developed a therapeutic gap year program. The name is a little misleading because it doesn't have to be a year long. We are launching this program now for people to use through the summer. People can use in the fall for the whole academic year. It's really a flexible program with rolling admissions that can be utilized when students need a little bit more social and emotional support, skills, or development before they're going to school or in the midst of their college years to be able to truly thrive in the complex collegiate environment. So we know that universities are really wonderful places to make social connections, but it's also really tough to make social connections when there are potentially thousands of new friends to be made. And that can be a really hard place to navigate. Lots of students, in a recent survey, 60% of students said they really wish they'd had more emotional preparation for what university life would be like. And so what we're thinking is, how can we offer an alternative path, especially considering that what the options are for students this fall might not be a good fit for them. Students might be looking around for what is an alternative way to continue my learning, my education, but maybe focus on social emotional development prior to going into the university or going back. We are really designing this for a program to be able to take a pause and think about what are the areas I need to develop in order to be able to be truly successful, not only in university, but of course in life. We're basing this program in Washington, D.C., where I am now. We currently have in our community tons of university students who would be wonderful mentors to gap year students who they can kind of teach the ropes of what school is like, but also support each other in navigating the new normal of academic life now, with some also a virtual and some distance learning opportunities as well. Just to expand on the offering a little bit more, we're really focusing on 5 different areas. We're focusing on emotional literacy, independent functioning and skill building. We want to focus on mental health recovery, whether that be from any kind of mental health diagnosis, substance use, eating disorder. There will be explicit opportunities to support folks with their academic performance and plans for academic functioning when they go into school. And of course, navigating and balancing social relationships, which is very important on a college campus and in life. We're going to be doing that through a variety of programming. therapeutic programming, but also really opportunities for service, for volunteer, for cultural immersion, potentially internships and that sort of thing. In general at the dorm, what we know is that in this time of uncertainty, whether it be because of the pandemic or just the state of affairs now, it's clear that our young people need more help. And so we've been trying to push ourselves to be really creative as we possibly can with the limitations of the pandemic to safely support our clients. So we have had the opportunity to work virtually with our clients. And what we know is it's so important to be able to do a true assessment of how virtual support will actually work for each individual client, and really be careful with additional check-ins, daily accountability in the morning and evening for wake and sleep support, but also about processing how is it feeling to be in their shoes throughout the day. We're continuing to provide lots of academic support. One of my favorite things that we do at the dorm is Dorm U, which is a mock college class, and we've continued Dorm U virtually. We have learning labs, study hall, we've done social groups. We have so much fun together. We've learned a lot of things, especially those of us who are staff. The clients are teaching us about ways that we can socialize virtually over Zoom and have had a lot of fun. Of course, like I said before, parents and families also need a lot of support. And so we've ramped up our parent and family support as well, which I think has been really important in order to be able to help navigate that unexpected return to the nest that a lot of young adults had with their families this spring semester. Lastly, I'll just say that the other thing we've learned is Zoom fatigue is real. And in order to be able to be online, to engage with Zoom thoughtfully, and be present during these sessions, we also need to take movement breaks. And so we've been really creative with moving some of our movement online, workouts, yoga, encouraging people to take breaks from the screen throughout the day. And on that note, I'm going to pass things over to Laura Place, who works at the University of Maryland Health Center. And she's going to talk a little bit about how the university has transitioned their support of students over the last semester.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So really the priority at the University of Maryland University Health Center, and really the services designed to support students across the University of Maryland, was to provide as much continuity and continued support to students as possible. I think all of us did a lot of scrambling, not just at the University of Maryland, but everywhere. But as quickly as possible, we used the modalities that were available to us, phone and secure message and email when necessary. And now, like many people, it feels like work is just something where we live on Zoom most of the day. We're doing all the appointment types that we would normally do, intakes and individual consultations and individual counseling sessions, group counseling. Our psychiatry services are all now things that we're able to do online. It does get a little bit complicated, like I think it has for a lot of providers at universities when we have students who are out of state. The University of Maryland has a really large portion of in-state students because we're we're the flagship school for the state of Maryland, and we have about 40,000 students. But a good chunk of our students come from particularly New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and then obviously all the states in the nation and a number of countries around the world. And because of the way that social work and psychiatry licenses operate, there's a limit to what level of support we're able to provide students. We haven't done what I think some schools maybe have chosen to do, and some students believed would happen. We haven't had to completely cut off support, but we're really having to navigate that space of maybe we can provide check-ins and supportive consultation and facilitation to referrals instead of being able to do what we had been doing before, which is full-on treatment with certain individuals. And then we're really relying on our campus partners. We were glad to see that our local campus partner, the Haven at College Park, went virtual quickly. Delighted to see that other community partners that we work with, the dorm and Mark and Colmac, all everyone was on the same page, right? We knew that we needed to provide continuity of care. Then that meant continued access to the whole spectrum of care. So that's been something that's been really delightful. The other thing that's continued is that other support services at the University of Maryland, things outside of the health center, going beyond medical visits and mental health visits and substance use or co-occurring disorder related visits, services at the counseling center have continued uninterrupted. The career center is continuing to support students. Areas that support marginalized groups of students, the LGBT Equity Center and our Multicultural Involvement and Community Advocacy Department, all of those staff are still working, all of those units are still operating, and our goal is to provide just continued support to students. So this is actually relates to a tip that I have for the treatment providers on this call, which I think is most of the folks who are with us, is that students are often assuming that things are not available because they're not physically on campus and can't walk into that office. Please help students to check that assumption. And that's maybe a little bit trickier than normal because it might also be a little bit harder to reach people. I don't think that that's the case for our sort of primary health and counseling services, but for people who may be in other roles on campus, reaching out to instructors and TAs and things like that, a little bit more persistence might be necessary. But we're doing everything that we had. I think I'm ready for the next slide. I think if anybody tells you that they know for sure what the fall semester is going to look like, they probably either have been blessed with an overlarge quantity of optimism, or they're trying to sell you something. I was thinking when I was preparing for this about how long we've got until the semester starts, and we've got basically about the same period of time that the pandemic has really profoundly affected us. And so much has changed so fast that I'm really on the same page with what Sarah said earlier, that we really just can't know absolutely for sure what's going to happen. I can say that what universities are doing is creating part of their decision-making process. And certainly part of the decision-making process for fall is going to look like in a number of domains at the University of Maryland comes down to creating multiple plans and then choosing amongst them. And I think one of the really good things about this is that any plan that we don't necessarily activate becomes the basis for a contingency plan, so that we aren't in the position that everyone was last semester of having to scramble and make changes and make plans at the last minute without knowing how the technology would work and what glitches were, and 2 weeks worth of everyone trying to figure out what to do about Zoom crashing. Like, those things should not be present for the fall and even beyond that, right? So that whatever plan we create, and I think many universities, most large universities, are looking at some kind of hybrid education model, and I think that's probably fairly likely for UMD as well. That if something interrupts that hybrid learning model, if some change in the pandemic or other conditions interrupt that hybrid learning model and we had to switch to full distance education again, then this would be something to be more prepared for. Things that I do know for sure, and I think it bears repeating, students are going to need support. They're going to need more support. I think they're really struggling. I've definitely encountered some students where really what they're struggling with is that they're used to not really having to be the full adult that they can be when they're engaging all of their faculties. They're used to having adultier adults that they can count on to keep our shit together, basically. And this whole scenario is really taxing our capacities to do that. And they're sort of shocked that previously organized professors are only sending out Zoom links 5 or 10 minutes before a class, and that it's harder to reach people than it used to be. They're encountering the very real need to leave and receive voicemails more than maybe they ever have before. And all of these things are just so alien to them that they kind of don't have the privilege to be out of that adult role and to sort of pass that off in some of the ways that maybe they could when all of us were functioning optimally, and maybe some of you are functioning optimally. And if you do, please get on the call at the end and tell us how, because So in line with that, I think it's helpful to try and be patient with, encourage students to be patient with staff as well as with themselves, to normalize everyone's anxiety about the uncertainty that this scenario holds, and then to mirror something that the campuses are doing, which is to create contingency plans for yourself. Students have learned a lot about how they learn on campus and how they learn off campus. What do they need to, I think it makes sense for treatment providers and families and students to talk together about what they will need in the different scenarios open to them, to make an active choice about whether or not to go back to campus, and if they are going back to campus, do you make changes in what you bring to campus physically, both to keep yourself safe while you're there, and potentially if you might have to leave campus sooner than planned. Are there changes in case the campus returns to distance education sooner than expected? Are there changes maybe in the physical space that might need to be made in the home, that at least if people can make that sort of change? Are there technologies that maybe someone could access that would be helpful? And then to really encourage those students and their families, if they need some level of accommodation, to reach out to the Accessibility and Disability Office sooner rather than later, and proactively, sort of assuming that it's not necessarily going to be plan A, that it might be plan B or plan C. What might they need? And then to arrange whatever testing and documentation is and process is necessary with accessibility and disability services as soon as possible this summer, because we think they're going to be very, very busy in the fall. I mean, they're always busy at the beginning of the fall semester, but I think it's going to be worse. And then I think we also have roles as treatment providers from a holistic standpoint to encourage families and their students to think about their safety from a medical standpoint. I'm not qualified to evaluate that with someone, but I am qualified to have a conversation with anyone that I'm caring for, to encourage them to talk with their primary care provider if they have any underlying conditions or are taking medications that might compromise their immune function. A lot of times I found young people don't realize that something that they're taking that's maybe for their skin can affect their immune function. So I think this is a conversation that's worth really having thoroughly with them. And my bonus tip, I happen to know some people, because I'm really closely connected to conduct at University of Maryland, and I happen to know people in conduct at other universities. Cheating has just ballooned. There are memes joking about it on Tumblr, which is where a lot of college students kind of live. And the number of cases has just exploded. And one of the effects of this is that professors, I think, are getting increasingly savvy about how to pick up on it. So I think students may believe that because they're really distant from the campus, that they're less likely to get caught for these things, or that if enough people do it, that they aren't going to have consequences enforced, and that's not necessarily the case. So the best prevention for cheating is to have a good study plan and self-care, and that I think is something that's very much in the domain of treatment professionals, that we can help students. We can help students avoid the last thing they need on top of everything else right now, which is the conduct case.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Laura. And we'll pass it over to Justin to talk about Penn State.
Hey, everybody. I'm a counselor at Penn State College of Medicine, but I'm going to talk a little bit from the perspective of, we call it the mothership, the big campus, and also some of the smaller. There's 22 little virtual small campuses as well, and we kind of all work as a team. And just so that you guys have some background, once the coronavirus hit, the pandemic started, most of the campuses took 2 weeks off to kind of retool and figure out what's going on. But at my campus, we just kind of marched forward. We were already using Zoom as a technology. So it's been really interesting to see different campuses use different strategies. But I want to talk about what some of the ways that we adapted care. First, doing virtual office hours. I think it was just important to be available to students so that they could drop in. I haven't had a ton of students use this, but I have had some very important conversations when a student has needed to reach out to me and just to show up and process something. The other part that's really hard is all the emails that are going back and forth with lots of information. So as a office, we really try to be strategic on how many emails we're sending out, trying to do one big email a week, those sorts of things. Other things that have been really helpful is a drop-in emotional support group. Initially, that was a really big hit. It kind of waned as the students were using so much Zoom. 4 to 5 hours of Zoom class a day is just really overwhelming. But it has started to pick up again. I think that students that have gone home maybe have really challenging, family dynamics, needed a space to process that, or just the stress related to their education. Medical students, science students, PA students, they haven't stopped classes, they've just continued. So having that group has been really important. Also, we started a series, When Home Becomes a Workplace series, or like when you're a student at home, and really targeted different topics like movement, families, relationships, and that's really been a huge hit. We've had over 100 people attend every time, faculty, staff, and students. It's been a great place to give people strategies. Additionally, we've added a couple of programs. The interactive screening program by the Suicide Foundation is another tool where students can reach out to us. If you can think about medicine, there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and that's a way that they can interact with us. A lot of universities have this program. If you don't have it, I would encourage you to get it. It's a way to actually have students get resources and eventually actually come in and receive mental health services in a non-stigma way where they're not identified initially. So that's a great thing. Also, we've added the CCAPs as well, which has been really helpful as an assessment tool. And then from a provider's perspective, I've started to use Zoom with flexibility. So I do 30-minute sessions. And I really they've kind of had a nice arc to them now. My students are really expecting a 30-minute session, but it's really nice if things are particularly challenging, we can go a bit longer, and I have that flexibility as well. And so that's kept my Zoom fatigue down, and it's helped keep theirs as well. So that seemed to work really nice. And also adding phone sessions is another trick, I would say. If you're doing a lot of Zoom sessions, see if you can get your clients or your patients to go every other session as a phone session. I think there's a lot of glitchiness with Zoom at times, particularly if you're doing it with students out of state, and some of those awkward silences and pauses that you're like, are they thinking, is this a therapeutic silence or is this Zoom, right? So a phone session can be a nice way to have more of a synchronistic experience with your patients or clients. Some other challenges have been counseling over state lines. I'm glad that we have the main campus really working on this. We've definitely used different terms like consulting, but if you guys need a list of what are the rules and regulations that have been relaxed, Penn State and the University of Texas has kept a living document with all of the relaxation standards so that you can be aware of where things are relaxed and where they're not, so that you can feel more comfortable as well. And additionally, if you're somebody that hasn't done a lot of online or virtual counseling, the American Psychology Association has a free training right now that's really great. It's about 8 hours, and then also PESI has offered one. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's Zoom counseling. It's pretty intuitive. I've actually learned a lot of little tips and tricks from these long trainings and gotten a lot of free CEUs out of them. So I'd recommend trying that. Finally, there's a lot of new crisis protocols to consider. One thing I do is when I start a session, I have the client or patient identify where they're at, making sure that I have an accurate phone number in case my technology fails, and then making sure that I have a crisis number, somebody in their life that I could call in case there was an emergency. And I think it also behooves you to do a little bit of legwork and think about where your students are. For instance, I'm doing some sessions with people in New York. Those are more consults because they haven't relaxed their guidelines. But I have people all over the place where if I don't know the crisis service in that area, it could be challenging. So make sure that you do your homework. So here's some tips that I've kind of learned in the last couple of months doing virtual or more online counseling. So number one, normalize, normalize, normalize. Just let your clients know that their personal, physical, and mental, emotional health is far more important right now than anything else. Let them know that they shouldn't try to compensate for lost time and productivity by working more. Telling them to be gentle with themselves in terms of their own self-judgment, and also being gentle with others. And I think this is another important one, communicating the idea that your client's success and how they define it will not be measured in the same way it was when things are normal. And I sent this out initially when I started working with my students, but I think this kind of wanes and goes into the background. So recently I've been sending this out again as a reminder. But if you think about it, it's also challenging with universities at all levels, at undergrad, grad, MD, right? Because there is a standard of proficiency and knowledge that they have to have. And so I think sometimes they get confused about the messaging. We are in a pandemic, or are we not? Because I'm still expected to meet these other standards as well. So that might be a really good conversation to have with a student who's struggling, saying, well, they're saying it's a pandemic, but they're still giving me even more work. Sometimes they try to compensate by giving more work. So helping them navigate that can be important. I really believe that taking a custom approach is helpful right now. Again, our superpower is really listening, right? Helping clients feel seen and heard, understanding their lived experience, and just really realizing that being a container, creating a space for a client to process their thoughts, feelings, and emotions is super helpful just in itself. I noticed that some of my clients really need tools right now. They want something additional that they can try, and that really can be helpful. Some just want to talk for a half hour and just be heard, and that can be really effective, as I mentioned. And it's really interesting. Some of our students, right, are introverts, right? So this is like heaven to them. They don't really want to talk to anyone anyway, so it's not as of a need to be seen as often. And then some of my students that are get energy from being around people want to be seen more often. So I've noticed a little bit of a trend based on a little bit on personality type. Also, just reminding the students about their own strengths and what they bring. Some of my students have been really done neat things like bringing in poetry, making sense of things right now, music that they like. So making sure that you remind them of those things that make them come alive and dust those things off. Additionally, I bring a lot of energy and humor to my sessions. I think it's just important for me to be really smiley and energetic when I come to session, that I show up. So that means I have to do a lot of self-care myself so that I have the energy, that I am excited to see them. I think that can actually help when you're going through a tough time. Additionally, a little trick that a couple of my colleagues have used is sometimes they play games during their sessions. There's a website called coolmathgames.com. Sometimes you can pull that up with your patient or client and just do it together while you're doing the session. That sometimes can help with somebody that struggles with concentration or attention. So just a little side pro tip. All right, so another thing that I really like to talk about is the mental health toolbox. It's something I review with all of my patients. I think right now, assessing what's working, maybe adding one thing, subtracting one thing that's not working, and making suggestions of resources that are available. I've been really diligent about looking at all the free stuff, what's available. And what I do is kind of get really my own best actor voice on and do an infomercial. And I pull up a second screen and I go through all the different ones. And usually they grab a couple of those and say, okay, yeah, I'll try that. An example would be, I really like the new, or it's not new, 10% Happier app. It's got amazing content on it. It's really expensive and it's free right now. So often I'll go, hey, I know you're struggling with sleep. Let's go to the sleep tab on my app and let's try one of these modules and then let's check in about that next week. Additionally, grounding techniques have been a really big hit. There's a couple websites that I have that have a list of like 30 grounding techniques. So taking the time in session to say, okay, well, let's name 5 things in the room that are green can be a really good way to help a student kind of bring themselves back into their body. Additionally, things like, okay, I want you to run your hands through water and think about how that feels, or experience that in your body, or even things like ice cubes melting in your hands. So giving them a list, having them try those sorts of things. Also, some of my sessions have gotten pretty repetitive. It feels like every week we're doing the same thing. So I've taken an opportunity to implement new tools. Specifically, medical students and science students are really they like to do things. So I've gotten really good at grabbing chapters. 2 of my favorite books are The Unified Protocol of the Transdiagnostic Approach. I just pull off chapters and PDFs from the library. Every session I send them a new one. And then we just review the content in session together. It's been a really good way to help them have additional tools instead of me just babbling about CBT. So it can really augment your work. Additionally, another one I love is called the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Depression. And basically, that's another one where I even just go through it in session with the client. A couple of apps that I really love, again, is 10% Happier, Headspace, and Waking Up with Sam Harris. All 3 are free right now, so check those out. I encourage you to try them yourself, and that way you can be educated when you're talking with your patients or clients. And finally, I'm just going to talk a bit about bolstering social networks. I think being really creative. My students have given me great ideas. Often they study together just by putting their phones next to themselves. Additionally, there's this YouTube channel called Study With Me, where somebody actually is studying next to you, and it uses the Pomodoro method, which can be really helpful, feeling like somebody's there. And I've put these other things in here. Social distance events in person and over Zoom can be really helpful. Reaching out to an old friend or relative that you haven't heard from in a while can be really great. Also, doing a Zoom workout like a yoga, a Pilates with your friends or family can be helpful. And this has been a really big hit. Social distancing lunches. My students will come out of their dorms. They have like student housing, and they just get close enough that they can talk to each other, and they each cook their own meal, and then they can kind of connect. And they've also done this in a workout way as well, using social distancing guidelines from the CDC to work out, connect with another person, and to get some good movement or exercise. Last two things that I've found that's been really helpful for bolstering social connections has been family game nights over Zoom. One that I think is really fun is using trivia. You can hand out, you can have one person have a text number, they send in the answers, you can play a game and really connect. And lastly, family happy hours. I'm not necessarily talking about drinking here, but having a time once a week where you connect with family members or friends, and they know that they can consistently count on that. So yeah.
Justin, thank you